Welcome to this very special edition of Millennium Live. I'm absolutely thrilled to be sat with Alan Siegel, who's going to be joining us at our CMO New York Day in June. How are you today?
Fine, thank you.
Good, wonderful. So if you don't mind, we're going to jump right in. So during your very impressive career from founding Siegel and Gale to now Siegelvision and working with so many top brands, how has marketing and branding evolved?
Well, I started in this business in 1968, and it's been a revolution and a total disruption of the business. When I started in the business, the advertising agencies controlled everything. The best and brightest people went to the agencies, and the client was very dependent on the agencies. And gradually, the businesses began hiring the top people from the agencies. They took the media away from the agencies, and then we layered on top of that digital media and the internet, so the business is completely different. And a good example of that is we're working with one of the biggest educational institutions in the country, or if not the world, and we had to put a media plan together to introduce the new identity. And we brought a media company in, and they did an hour presentation. 55 minutes was covering the 7 or 8 or 9 digital platforms and 5 minutes traditional media.
Oh, wow, that's very interesting, complete difference. So on Siegelvision's website, it states that the purpose-driven brand is key to 21st century success. So what, in your words, does it mean to be purpose-driven in today's world?
One of the things that I found is that most companies have mission and vision statements. They're generic, written by committees. People can't remember them. They don't provide real direction for the company. So I've been driving all of our clients to put it together a purpose statement. And it's not about doing social good. It's about what do they stand for, what do they believe in, what are they trying to do as an organization. Generally 6, 7, 8, 9 words.
Makes a lot of sense. It's a very good piece of advice. So actually it leads very nicely into this next question. In a city and a nation with thousands or millions of marketing messages competing for the consumer's attention, what does brand voice mean to a marketer, and can a marketer ever truly guarantee that they'll be heard?
Yeah, I registered brand voice in the 1970s because my whole career is focused on trying to bring consistency across all platforms. When I started in the business, there were advertising agencies, there were direct response firms, there were PR firms, every kind of firm imaginable, and each had their own message. So I've really tried to focus organizations on bringing consistency across all platforms. So the way I talk about voice today is it's not only how you speak, it's what you say, what is your content, and what do you deliver. Do you deliver on what you say you're going to do? So there's a consistency on across platforms, and there's a consistency on doing and delivering on what you say. So it's a broader, deeper concept. And I've found in working on projects now, if you just show people strategies, they don't know what's going on. So what we've been doing is we've been translating our findings and our strategies into executions across all media to get clients to understand how to personalize communications, how to bring consistency across platforms, how to really connect with people with the new technologies as well as the traditional technologies.
Absolutely, more and more consumers are craving consistency and authenticity of brand message, brand voice. So the need to think customer first has really changed how the marketing functions, for want of a better word. So how can CMOs better incorporate this consistent and authentic mentality into branding decisions?
Well, you brought up a really good point, and that's authenticity. And you see what happened with Facebook recently, right? And so corporations today can't get away without being honest and direct with their customers. And one of the basic tenets of my company is, since the 70s, has been clarity above all, and communicating to people with transparency, with honesty, with directness, giving people information so they can make an intelligent, decision. So I think that's one of the really big, important changes where we're going to see corporations now standing up and forcing government and on the one thing to do the right thing, and giving their customers intelligent explanations of what's going on. I mean, we all, just didn't pay any attention to these contracts on these websites, and they're unintelligible. They have offensive material in them. And for instance, I thought it was very interesting when the EPA said they were changing the pollution controls on cars. You would think that General Motors, which almost went bankrupt by not being open to newness and changing, would be, and who's spending so much money on electronic cars, would stand up and say, look, this is the wrong thing to do. And it's in the best interest not only of this country, but of the world to deal with pollution. So this authenticity thing is really, really important, And secondly, I think it's important for these companies to personalize their communications. So, for instance, I've had an American Express card since the '60s, right? And I'm a member. Mm-hmm. They say member since '68. They send these notices to me that the government or their lawyers they have to send. They send me correspondence. It in no way recognizes me as an individual, me as a member, and how much I spend with them, and what my interests are. That is such a mistake, So I think with the new technology, with all this data analytics and everything, companies sort of really have to personalize the communication and treat people as individuals, And you say customer first. That's what they have to do.
Yeah, absolutely. We're almost data rich but knowledge poor. I mean, there's so much data out there, but actually using it the right way to talk to the consumer on a one-on-one basis. Right. A lot of companies don't often quite achieve that as of yet. So C-level executives around the world are anticipating digital technology, which has already changed the marketing world, to not only drive marketing, but also business as a whole. So how do you think technologies like blockchain and artificial intelligence are going to impact the industry?
Well, I mean, I've been studying this, and what's going to happen is people are going to be speaking to these devices that are in their offices, and they're going to ask them for recommendations about certain things. On the one hand, which makes branding more important. You have to have a distinctive brand that stands out, and you have to have a loyal following, so that don't say, give me 5 recommendations, you say, get me such and such, okay? So I think that's a very important consideration. Another consideration is, if you call the bank, you call your insurance company, you deal with a company, you're gonna be able to have a conversation with that device, and whoever is, whether it's a man or woman or whatever, they're going to be able to have a conversation. They're going to have access to your records if you have and you'll be able to really have a discourse with them instead of just what's going on now. So there's huge emphasis on brands being able to build loyalty and distinctiveness and compelling customer benefits to rise above being one of the gang that they look at.
Yeah, no, it's true. Voice technology has been something we've been looking at, and particularly how it's going to impact search. It's going to change the way marketers use search engine marketing, search engine optimization, because it's not just going to be enough to be on page 1 of Google. You've got to be the first answer when someone says, hey Siri or hi Google on their device. So it's definitely going to impact how we use these channels that have become so everyday for marketers in the business. So co-written with longtime colleague Irene Etzkorn, your book, Simple, Conquering the Crisis of Complexity, has been a huge success. Since both you and Irene believe in simplicity as a philosophy, what is the first step for business leaders looking to conquer complexity?
Most companies are lazy, and they don't want to deal with dealing with complexity. I'll give you a good example. We have financial service companies that have very complicated products now, and you can position the brand, you can make promises, you can inspire your brokers and agents and sales forces, but you're still giving people contracts they can't read or understand, right? And so for a company, companies have to begin to deal with this, in my opinion. Customers are becoming more demanding, more educated, and can really put a lot of pressure on companies. They couldn't before. When I first started simplifying things, people said, well, we have no choice. What are we going to do? Now you can aggregate people and put pressure on companies. So when we're doing this, we're talking to lawyers, and we're talking to public affairs people, and the transparency laws and the laws that the government is passing is say things should be readable. And we say to them, have you tested the things you have to make sure they're readable? And they look at you like you're crazy. What do you mean? They have no interest in it. So it takes courage, because when you simplify something, all of the offensive things that are in that contract that have offended people and been used against them have to be taken out, and the product has to be recalibrated. And companies are not great at change management and dealing up to that. So I've been fighting this since 68, 70s with lawyers. And when I meet with them today, they bring up the same objections they brought up 25 years ago.
That's really interesting, actually. That hasn't changed from their perspective, really. But it's interesting you say that, because I think when even just something simple as writing copy, if you're writing copy for a new industry you haven't worked in before, you're instantly thinking, I've got to get these words in, this jargon that I saw online, I don't really fully understand, but I've got to have that word in. And actually, if you just broke it down and then saw your customer as the human being that they are, the copy would be a lot more simple. So even just in a very simple example.
I don't think the first thing I ever simplified was Citibank's loan note. Mm-hmm. And they had, the biggest lesson that I learned is they had a 280-word default provision. Essentially it said, if you do any of these things, you defaulted and, you have to pay penalties or we'll take the contract away. And when I investigated it, I found out the bank had no way of enforcing it. They didn't have communications programs that could identify 90% of these default provisions. And in effect, you defaulted if you didn't pay on time. So a 278-word paragraph was simplified into one sentence, default if you don't pay on time. And what we learned then is that, the underpinning of getting rid of complexity is simplifying the content before you try to write it or present it.
Definitely true. Mm-hmm. So with all the new trends and technologies out there, it's very easy to become overwhelmed by the potential that these innovations are offering to the industry. So what advice do you have for other C-level executives and industry leaders as we progress into the future of marketing?
Most companies have to really concentrate on being distinctive and standing out from their competition. And we're working a lot now, in education, in not-for-profit, along with for-profit companies. And the big challenge is, how do we differentiate ourselves from the competition? Mm-hmm. How do we convey our personality, what we stand for? How do we personalize the communications and make sure that people understand it? And how do we ensure that the company delivers what they're promising? And that's a real critical thing. And that's how I define voice. It's what you say, how you say it, and delivering on the promise. And most companies don't have really distinctive positioning. Most companies do not have voice programs. Most companies haven't figured out how to deal with the dramatic changes that are going on with digital media. I would say a vast majority of websites are not effective. Too much information.
It doesn't get right to the point.
Doesn't get to the point, hard to access, lacking in personality. I think another thing is that a lot of these companies, their communications are lacking in passion.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you bring up passion, because actually you need to have passion in your product so that consumers feel your passion and feel engaged enough to purchase. So can you tell us a little bit about the 3 principles of complexity that you detail within your book? Empathize, distill, and clarify.
Right. Well, I've talked a little bit about distilling. Empathy is really a critical element underpinning everything we do, understanding who our audiences are. And what we can't underestimate the value of employees, and communications programs really, and marketing programs have to be keyed to the employees who are the ambassadors of the brand. They represent the company in the marketplace, they create the communications. That having a spirit and an understanding about the purpose of the organization, what it stands for, how they want to talk to people is, absolutely critical. So empathy has been an underpinning of everything we do. Understanding who we're dealing with, whether it's an internal audience or external audience. And if you go to a hospital, if you're buying life insurance, if you're buying an expensive car, understanding what kinds of pressures people are dealing with is really critical. Distilling is basically getting rid of extraneous things and cutting things down and making them useful, right? Mm-hmm. And clarity is the theme of my life, clarity above all. It's more than simplicity. It's making sure that when you speak to people and you have programs, that they really are understandable and usable and functional.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting you talk about, the message in an eternal business. We've noticed recently that there's a trend that CMOs are becoming increasingly invested in corporate culture. So as you said, from engaging employees as brand ambassadors, but also to beat out the competition for the top talent. So how can these three principles be applied within the business to help transform corporate mentality from complexity to simplicity?
I think the biggest problem in the world today is lack of leadership. And building a culture drives out of strong leaders and people who really believe in things and are consistent. And when I go out and talk to people, I ask them to tell me about 5 business leaders, that you really respect and are good leaders. And they name the same 1 or 2 or 3. And recently I did a survey because we're doing a lot in education, and I asked in this survey, I asked people across the country to name 5 presidents of universities. They couldn't name 1. When I was growing up, university presidents, were really important and so on. So I think the key to all of these programs is building a culture that so the company functions effectively. I always say, culture beats strategy to death. But so few companies really that we see have a strong culture. And I think it comes out of lack of leadership.
It's got to come from the top down.
It doesn't, and I mean, a lot of business today has been driven down to the middle, to committees and groups of people. When I first started in this business, our client was the CEO. In many projects that we deal with now, we have minimal contact with the CEO. And the CEO has to live the brand. The CEO has to make decisive decisions. A CEO has to look forward. Standing in place isn't going to do you any good. And I see a paucity of this. I'm really confused by it. I'm upset by it. Whether it's in government or business, or in education or international affairs, there's a lack of leadership.
Absolutely. I mean, is there one characteristic that you think defines a great leader?
Well, I've been in this business a long time, and the best leader that I've ever seen was the president of John Jay College of Criminal Justice. 15,000 students, part of City University of New York, and he was a great leader. I admire him. He's become a good friend, and it's the best program I ever did. Of the 300 or 400 programs I did, it's the best. And I attribute a lot of it to the fact that he was a great leader. We connected, but he had presence, he had vision. He had a marvelous personality. He lived the brand, and he had great taste. And by that, I'll say this: he initiated an award where we took 3 people from around the world who did more for justice, right? And we had in our auditorium, we had people come. We had 1,000 people come. So he designed the evening, and he had opera singers and sing between we had famous people introduce them, then we had opera singers. Then after we had a dinner, and he had a big sheet up on the wall, and he had 7 girls who were 12 years old playing Mozart.
Oh,
and
wow.
and I always said, where did you learn that? You went to Yale Law School, you worked for the Justice Department. Where did you get, and the food was great. Where did you get this taste? So everything he did, the theme of the company, of the school that we did is Fierce Advocates for Justice. And he lived it. And so the other day, I got a letter from a girl who was from the Philippines who went to the school, and she's disabled. She's in a wheelchair. And she wrote me, I try to help the students here. She wrote me a letter and said, would you help me get into law school? And I said I would. And she told me, she said, I couldn't get around the school, And given that the theme of the school is Fierce Advocates for Justice, I became the advocate for the disabled, And so he had drilled that whole theory and that whole positioning into the students, who lived it. And so when they go out in the world, they're fierce advocates for justice. They're bringing real value to working for the government, working in a law firm, whatever they do.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. So what has retiring as chairman from Siegel and Gale and going on to create Siegelvision taught you about yourself?
That in order to stay young and vital, I have to be on the forefront of an industry that I helped create. I mean, and leaving that company, which had many hundreds of people and was part of a big holding company, inhibited my ability to work with purpose-driven organizations that are small, work with organizations that can't even afford to pay us. I wanted to be involved with companies that were making a difference and innovation, and not about just making money.
So with all the innovations in the marketplace today, the increasing complexity of the marketing role, is simplicity truly achievable?
Yeah. I mean, if it is, if you have good leadership, I mean, if you have people running organizations who really live it and believe it, and if you have people who are bright and responsive and want to do a good job, yeah, it can be done. But as I said, simplicity is very, very hard. It's about change. It's about taking on challenges. So, for instance, when I first started doing simplicity, I worked for a lot of insurance companies. So we took their policies, which were unintelligible, and made them simple, right? And so they had to fire people in the purchasing department, because a lot of it was electronic. We didn't even have to have paperwork. And they had to fire certain lawyers who refused to simplify things. They said it puts the company at risk. And you just go down the line. So change that caused significant changes in the companies and the way they did business and the way they thought about things. So when you simplify things, you disrupt, and you cause upheaval. And I think people have to do things in a different way, and it's not easy for people. People don't like change,
They don't.
And but so it's not just about how you write and how you talk to people. It's what are you trying to do? What are you trying to say? And ensuring that you do it. So one of the most interesting things to me is in medicine, and you look at somebody like the Cleveland Clinic or the Mayo Clinic and MD Anderson and companies like that. They really get it. They have patient-first programs. And when you apply to go there, you fill out a lot of paper. When you get there, you just put in your room and you're taken care of. They have somebody coordinating what's going on. And I went to the Cleveland Clinic with Irene. We were writing our book. Irene said, "Why does it smell so nice here?" I said, "Because we open the windows, so people can breathe." When you wait for somebody that's having an operation in your family, you have a code number, and there's a big chart up on the wall that tells you the status of what's going on. When you see companies like that, and the Mayo Clinic's like that too, where so is MD Anderson, so is some of the. When you compare them to some of the hospitals, particularly the hospitals in New York, which are chaotic, you say, it can be done. What is it from? You have really strong leadership and a real philosophy of taking care of the patients. When I was walking down the hall in the Cleveland Clinic, somebody spilled some coffee, and 3 people came out, and wiped it up. I was looking at a directory, and 2 doctors came up to me and said, "Can we help you?" I was walking down the hall, and there was a huge sign. And in that sign was a woman. And the woman said to me, "Where are you going?" And I was talking to the sign. And I said, "I'm going so-and-so." And said, "Well, here's a map and how you can get there. And if you have any trouble, call me at 211. So just when you go through the place, it's beautiful, it's clean, people, and everybody's working toward the same purpose, and if you get in an elevator, you don't see people in jitneys with stuff coming out. They have a separate elevator bank,
Just about making the patient feel more comfortable. I mean, being in hospital is typically a stressful environment, such a situation. So just thinking about those touch points just goes the extra mile.
I mean, to me, it's in my book. I wrote. Irene and I were so taken back because the hospitals in New York here. If you go to an emergency room, I had to wait 15 hours in an emergency room about 8 weeks ago when I really got sick. It's just inexcusable.
Yeah. It just adds to the pressure of the situation as well. If that's
and I went, I every 4 years I go for some kind of cardiac test, which you do when you get older, and you sit in these chairs and you have to fill out all this paperwork, and all around you are people who've had heart attacks lying on jitneys with things coming out of it. So this particular hospital was a client of ours, and we worked it out. So now you get the paperwork in advance. Those people go on a different elevator. The seating is comfortable. They've streamlined the process, so instead of taking 4 hours, it takes 2.5 hours. when you pay attention, but no one ever paid attention to that, you know? It was all about getting people better and not what the experience is like.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so.
I think, it's very true that you need to walk a mile in your customer's shoes to really understand what an experience is like and to give them that extra. So we are absolutely thrilled that you're going to be joining us as our designated keynote speaker at CMO de New York in June, actually on June 12th. So what are you looking forward to most about the event?
Well, I love talking about what I'm doing and having an interaction with people who are on the line doing it. So I really enjoy these experiences, meeting, I love meeting people and I love hearing what they're doing and I love people asking me hard questions. That's how I learn. You asked me before about doing this. I'm constantly learning and pushing and shoving. When at Siegel and Gale, we were part of a big holding company, right? And the emphasis on making money. My emphasis is on learning and challenging people, stimulating people, doing things better, providing insight. So these kinds of presentations where I get to interact with 150, 200 people, I really enjoy. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Perfect. Well, I'm so excited and looking forward to it. I, for one, am very much looking forward to it. It was an absolute pleasure to meet you, and I'll see you in 5 weeks' time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alan.